Do you regret how you dealt with the Hans Niemann situation?
I do have regrets about how we handled that.
Hans is building his own chess platform, a direct competitor to chess.com. Are you afraid?
Good luck to Hans trying to make a better fair play system than chess.com.
Why does Hans call you the chess mafia? So you were born into a cult.
I was actually taken away from my mother by the cult leader because he was obsessed with chess and believed that my divine purpose was to be a chess player.
Today, we're joined by Danny Rensch, co-founder of chess.com, international master, and author of his new book, Dark Squares. We're going to talk about recent chess drama and then a little bit more about his book that's coming out this September.
Let's get right into it. My favorite question I wanted to ask you is, why does Hans call you the chess mafia?
Wow, we are jumping right into it. Here we go. What Hans went through in 2022 was pretty intense, and I understand that from his perspective, the way the dominoes fell, it looked like people were in cahoots in his mind, right? There was this acquisition that chess.com had made of the Play Magnus group. Then I'm with Magnus in Miami.
You guys
then
are the
Magnus
villains.
accuses him of cheating, right? And then chess.com removed him from the chess.com Global Championship. And now, of course, I'm saying that very sympathetically from his view. I think there's a lot of reasons why people thought what they did and felt what they did. And of course, Hans had a history of cheating.
Do you
and of
think
course,
he was right about any of his anger?
Oh, I think for sure. I think that I think if everybody had it to do over again, there might have been slightly cooler heads and there might have been opportunities for us to kind of review things, to do game review differently. That said, I mean, I have reviewed it many times. I've written about it in my book. I've talked to Netflix about it. It was very difficult for me to judge myself or even anybody else for what they did in hindsight, knowing everybody was acting with limited information, trying to sort of like corral something that was just incredibly explosive that was happening. From then on, Hans has continued to perpetuate a little bit of the chess mafia, by a little bit, maybe a lot, depending on some people's view, right? And I think, look, I would also say that at this point, Hans gets his own benefit from doing that, right? I think creating a little bit of a Hans versus the world mentality is what he wants. Mm-hmm. And I think that, you know, for entertainment purposes, maybe that's a good thing. I think that there's no reason to believe any of it at all. I mean, that's the truth. At the same time, I wonder when he lists the people that are against him and the organizers who take action or somehow limit him, I go, how is chess.com continue to be the target of this? We have him playing in all of our events, in the Speed Chess Championship, playing Entitled Tuesdays.
My specific question for you, one of his main criticisms of chess.com is about their fair play regulations, saying obviously that they were gatekeeping and not inviting him to events. Has Hans been completely invited to everything, or is there still times where he's not invited, you think?
No, I mean, Hans, based on his level of player, right? I mean, not everybody gets invited to the same events. We do our best with all of them, right? I mean,
so no recent invitations have been rescinded to Hans?
No, not at all. In fact, not only that, it would be without getting into terms that no one is allowed to talk about, in the fact that we did come to an agreement, that would be a direct violation of the agreement. In fact, one of the most important things for Hans, I would say the main thing for him, was that he would be given an equal opportunity.
I like that you smile as you say that, because another scandal, is it good or bad for the chess world?
I mean, I smile partly because the first one was accidental, and this one I would argue again would be accidental. But at the same time, a lot of attention came into chess, right? And certainly, you know, we are still in a lane not as big as maybe other sports or media, you know, markets, I guess, to say that we definitely benefit from all news, right? I mean, that's just the truth. The chess world grows anytime people are talking about it, even if it's not always for the best of reasons, right? So I am interested to see what they say. I am interested to see what both Magnus and Hans have said. There you go. And
what do you think about my hat?
I love it. First of all, great.
Oh,
did you have that custom made just for me, by the way?
No, a friend had visited Hans and they brought it back, which I wanted to ask you, does chess.com ever get afraid about any of their competitors?
We are in a really good position, right? We are obviously the market share leader far and away, and we do tend to benefit from everyone and anyone talking about chess. So one of the unique things is, even when someone launches a chess website that is a direct or intends to be a direct competitor if it takes off for any sort of reason, whether it's because it's attached to Hans Niemann, whether because Endgame.ai is a smart name if you're trying to raise money right now because everyone wants to throw money at AI.
You need to put the .ai and boom, your valuation gets bigger.
There you go, right? So for whatever reason someone is doing that, like, we will benefit. And that is a uniquely, I guess, awesome position to be in. So no, I am not worried about Endgame AI. Congratulations to Hans.
Have you guys considered buying chess.ai? Because that could be helpful for us.
We have
as
not.
an industry.
It's not the worst idea. Just someone probably owns chess.ai.
It's probably worth so
I would
much
assume,
as a domain.
right? We do not own chess.ai, so whoever does out there, maybe that's the play, but no.
I do want to give the audience a bit of background on Endgame.ai. So for the last probably more than a couple weeks, Hans has been streaming and promoting Endgame.ai, bringing huge prize funds as well, like 20K match versus niche, bringing top players. And his direct quotes on it was that, of course, right now it's not public, but what I thought was interesting is he was directly criticizing chess.com and saying, we will have better fair play educational features. And I quote, much better game review. You guys don't need to pay the chess mafia $11 a month for a subpar product. All the core features that you guys want to use, we're not going to charge for that. There were also some other notable highlights of the stream that I'll get into.
Maybe he's
but
coming for Lee Chess.
I was going to say, is he aware of Lee Chess?
Specifically.
Lee Chess has had a business model of trying to take everything chess.com does and make it free for years. So I don't know that he realizes he has another competitor. So
that's fair. Actually, that's an answer I didn't think about. Maybe he was speaking about Lee Chess. Well,
no. He's definitely speaking about us. But I'm saying he first of all, the claims about better fair play, ironic from someone who has said many times chess.com has the best fair play in the world. And Hans is right about that. Replicating what we've done on the fair play side would be quite the uphill task.
Is there any way to talk about that? So for people who don't understand, fair play is trying to catch people who cheat on chess online.
Yeah.
And that can be a very hard problem because if somebody is using an engine the entire time, it's obvious. But if someone has their buddy who's like 200 points higher ELO, who's giving a move or two every now and then, how do you catch that?
Yeah, it's very hard.
Can you explain at all how it works? I know you can't share all of it.
No, I can.
People can work around it, but
it is very difficult. It's a very difficult problem to solve, and especially because you're literally catching someone and telling them they did wrong for something they're supposed to do, which is play the best chess move in the position, right? So at what point do you discern that they are finding the best move at a rate that is deemed inhuman, and by what standard, right? Which human are you comparing them to? Garry Kasparov, Magnus Carlsen, or, themselves in terms of what who decides what they're capable of, right? And I'm saying that as questions first to kind of help lay the groundwork to say that is probably where the majority of our competitive edge and what we have been doing for a long time is so far ahead of others. And that one of the things that happened early on in our own kind of existential crisis around cheating was recognizing that not only was this a crazy problem to try to solve, but then think about trying to solve it at scale. We focus so much on the professionals because all of us, it's a small circle, right? We all know each other. We know the scandals, but the truth is, even stopping cheating at scale when you have 20 million games a day is like a serious math problem.
Have you ever found somebody who the algorithm flagged to be a cheater and you guys were really convinced that ended up proving their innocence later?
We've had a couple of false positive cases over the years. One of them was a case that really improved our algorithm early on, which was we closed an FM for cheating. This FM will go nameless. And this guy didn't meet the MO. He didn't meet the normal, he's not talking like a guilty person. And we had already kind of been able to detect just how people sound in those environments. So we ended up having some conversations with him. And I saw how he was posting on a different forum. I think it was Red Hot Pawn, one of the OG chess forums. And we ended up taking a closer look and we found that the algorithm had been tipped in a direction that was a false positive because he had been getting a bunch of easy endgames. And the reason he was getting them is because he was playing in a whole bunch of tournaments against lower rated players. So when you're converting a king and rook or king and queen endgame, you end up playing a whole bunch of top moves at a rate that is actually not shouldn't be considered cheating. So this was early on in our algorithm. It sounds simple now, but we actually developed a false positive in our algorithm to detect way more complex positions than just king and queen endgames now, where we actually detect what it is to evaluate the easiness of the position, essentially. And we use that to protect many players, to avoid false positives. So that's one of them. Most of the time, we operate so conservatively that we don't act unless we already have kind of done a lot of our own stuff, I guess, to make sure that we've sort of checked ourselves very, very closely.
I actually have a suggestion.
Yeah.
I don't think people would cheat online if the punishment was capital punishment.
Or
We've had a lot of these suggestions.
Or we could maybe pull a Nathan for you, and everyone has to upload an embarrassing photo of themselves naked in a hot dog suit, no nudity, and then it gets posted to the internet.
If you cheat.
But okay, by
go
capital
public
punishment, I assume you meant like
humiliation
lifetime banning, not actual capital punishment.
No.
Oh, capital
No,
punishment?
Alex
Okay, that's
meant
okay.
actual capital
I'm sorry,
punishment.
do you think anyone would cheat online if they got caught, they got killed?
I stand by the fact that we have taken many cases personally, including that of Hans Niemann, which was a closure I did myself, and I tell the whole behind the scenes of that in the book because that is a story that's never been told. And I stand by that we showed mercy and did something that in the end maybe came back to bite us. I gave Hans's side of him thinking we're chess mafia. I have my side of the fact that we are not chess mafia, and I stand by what we did. And we're trying to work with a kid to do something that I thought was right. And I would want to do that again. At the same time, I hear the community's cry, which is, okay, you can give leniency to kids. You can have a bit of a individual case-by-case basis. But overall, if we find someone who egregiously and or repeatedly cheated in more than one event, we are now in a place where they know so well what they're doing. And frankly, the stakes have gone so high. We're not doing $10,000 a year anymore with chess.com random blitz championships, right? We have millions of dollars in prizes.
Also, ultimately, what is your opinion on Hans's take, which his answer was, again, a quote, "If they're going to blacklist me, they're not going to invite me. I'm going to organize my own tournaments, my own matches, and I'm going to show that I am, the best player in the world." And then he also said, I say that humbly, didn't want to forget that. But what do you think about Hans's whole approach to, okay, if I'm not welcome in the chess community or the chess mafia, I don't know what entities we're talking about now, he's just going to do everything his own. He's bringing huge prize funds. He's organizing his own matches. He's bringing commentators. He's getting more and more top players. What are your actual thoughts on Endgame.ai?
Best of luck to Hans in building Endgame.ai. When it comes to the question about chess mafia and generally the events ecosystem, I acknowledge that Hans had a lot of things come down on him in 2022, right? But that's if you're taking fully the position, which also started with and has now even been backtracked into acknowledging lies from Hans's side. I mean, Hans himself has gone back on what he initially said in terms of his own cheating, right? In terms of it was only when I was 12, when I was 16. At first, it was never in rated games. Then it was never in prize events. Now he's said that he has cheated in prize events. And so if I was in Hans's PR camp, I would be like, bro, if you really want people to love you, actually come clean now. Actually tell the whole truth about why you were closed. Stop playing the bullshit chess mafia stuff and actually say, like, look, I lied. I was scared. I was a kid. I didn't know what was happening. That would be a thing that people would go, okay.
Well, from his PR team, confusion is a better strategy. You should never admit to doing
exactly.
anything.
That was the PR team if you really want to be like, here's who I really am, innocent, right?
That's the chess.com
exactly.
PR team telling
hold on.
advice.
But if you're the PR team who has a business incentive, you would continue to play the chess mafia.
Yeah.
You would continue to make this stuff up. You would continue by again to claim that chess.com is in any way involved in some way blacklisting him. From the moment the lawsuit has been settled, he has been. Was he not in Paris last year? Is he not competing in Title Tuesday every week? Is he not getting invites to all of our events? Did he not just win freestyle? By the way, what site was that on? Right? Hans has had issues with other organizers at OTB. And if I was Hans, I would say, why do you think you have issues with those organizers? Maybe it has nothing to do with your history with chess.com. Maybe actually deal with the issues you have with the organizers in terms of what you've done on site at those events without even getting into it.
Do you think if Hans becomes a top player, like top 10 in the world, it's going to prove he wasn't a cheater? He just beat Magnus and HIkaru recently in Title Tuesday.
In regards to Hans's future, I think it remains to be seen in terms of how people will feel about his career. He's only 22 years old, right? I mean, I think if Hans goes on to become a top 10 player, or maybe even better than that, like ultimately people will forgive. People will look at this as, okay, this was a young kid who was troubled for whatever reason, made some mistakes, but ultimately when history was written, he proved himself out as one of the most talented players in his generation. And frankly, I'm rooting for Hans on that level. Like, honestly, like to me, I want Hans to have a positive impact on chess and for him to be someone who has the opportunity to mature and to grow into his life. So I have absolutely zero qualms with the idea that Hans becomes an incredible player and that people look back at his career with positivity. But I think you can hold two opposing truths in two hands, which is I can say that and acknowledge that Hans cheated way more than he admitted to online. For whatever reason, he is still lying about it. And yes, it is in his business interest to call us Chess Mafia while he's trying to launch competing companies. And again, if you really had integrity in regards to the Chess Mafia, I would say, well, then stop playing in events on chess.com. Then I don't think that that's ever going to happen, because we are doing a lot of good for the chess world and a lot of good for Hans, frankly. And again, ever since the lawsuit settled and moved away, he's had nothing but opportunities on our site. So if there are other organizers that have issues with Hans, I recommend Hans and those organizers deal with it. I will not look back at Hans's career with any negative sentiment. If he continues to prove himself out and continues to deliver, I can say that while also acknowledging that I stand by what we had to do and what we found about his games online.
Okay, I have one last Hans quote just because things were so juicy. I really watched all of his streams yesterday preparing for this interview. Hans recently accused HIkaru of throwing. There's a really good clip. We got to put this in the episode. But pretty much, HIkaru is in a winning blitz endgame, and all HIkaru needs to do to win first is play this mating sequence, forcing knight b3 move. And if HIkaru wins, then Hans places first, not HIkaru. Hans is live watching the match. I've never seen Hans more enthusiastic cheering on HIkaru. He's gonna win. I've never rooted more for HIkaru in my life. Ooh, I love you. I love you. Come on. I love you. Knight b3. Come on. Oh, wait. What? I literally wrote this watching his VOD. He's choking. What are you doing? No, wait. Are you doing? You're not losing this on purpose. I swear you're not losing on purpose. If this is thrown, I swear I give up. That is my summary. So essentially what happens is HIkaru misses a tactic that Hans says HIkaru would see in his sleep, and ends up drawing the game, which doesn't allow Hans to play first in the tournament. How much of these situations where the chess players still have prejudice or against Hans, or even what is the likelihood that you think this story is true?
Look, I don't think it's secrets or breaking any news that there is zero love lost between HIkaru and Hans Niemann. HIkaru does not like Hans, and for good reason. I mean, to be honest with you, like, when Hans threw the whole lawsuit at everybody, in addition to the fact that it was a ridiculous amount to claim and a ridiculous PR grab, he could have chosen a lot of different streamers to include in it, and he cherry-picked HIkaru.
Honestly, I'm so relieved we weren't included in that.
Which, by the way, cost HIkaru a lot of money to defend himself in a lawsuit. And so I'm not in the HIkaru camp here to say that, look, HIkaru said a lot of things, and obviously Hans, for whatever reason, decided he had enough ammo to do it. But for the record, you guys said things. The Chess Bros said things. Ben Feingold said things. Everybody said things, right? And so HIkaru had every right to be upset with Hans, or in my opinion, has every right, without me going even into their past. They've known each other for a long time. It's not my business. And I feel like I know too much about it, that it would be unfair for me to share about either of them. But I will say that regardless of their history, just the recent history with Hans choosing to include HIkaru in a lawsuit, that every other party seemed to kind of make sense. Although I felt it was random that he chose me and not Eric too. That was kind of random. But every other party, I guess, made sense. And HIkaru was cherry picked, and frankly, it cost HIkaru a lot of.
Do you share in the book how much the lawsuit costs?
No, I don't share numbers. I can't share that. But I know that it cost HIkaru not just money, but a lot of emotional energy. And so, from HIkaru's perspective, I don't think he will ever like Hans Niemann. That said,
but do you think he threw?
I don't think he threw the game. I think, look, it's part of chess that these things happen. I mean,
might be three.
Well, these guys find brilliant moves and they miss brilliant moves, right? I think it's fair to say that if you saw HIkaru do that more than once, you would start to have a pattern. And again, maybe I put this through my fair play statistical brain, because that's kind of how I've been jaded to think about it. But I would argue that looking at it from a statistical lens and removing some of the emotion allows us to make the right call most of the time. Because just as much, if I was to act on every time a super GM was mad and accusing someone, we would have closed a lot more innocent people. So I have to keep them at bay just as often as I have to, take the case of, look, this seems odd, but the truth is we need more data to tell. And so in a one-by-one basis, if you're emotionally invested, maybe to you it looks like HIkaru threw the game. But to me, it was time scramble, and HIkaru made a big blunder. And I don't have enough evidence to believe that HIkaru would. I think HIkaru cares enough about winning that he wouldn't do that.
Yeah.
That said, I'm not going to deny that there's probably zero love lost. But would HIkaru be happy in the end that Hans didn't get first? Probably. But I don't think he would have thrown the game to go with that.
Okay, for my final segment to wrap up the Hans, we're going to play a little game called Hans Tweets True or False. And I prepared a presentation. Number one, they call me the bad boy of chess.
That is how he thinks of himself. Though I would give you a hot take. I think Magnus Carlsen is actually the bad boy of chess.
I don't know if that's a hot take. I think he's been publicly referred to as the bad boy of chess. Maybe it's a hot take now because everyone thinks it's Hans.
Okay, but I guess the recent table
But
slam.
I can't see Magnus tweeting that.
Okay.
Oh, and
I'm
we're
gonna
collecting points for if you're right or wrong. And if you're wrong, you have to prank call Hans. That's the punishment.
I'm going to say it's true, even though I feel like I'm being baited.
Well, you should go with your gut. You were baited. All right.
Ah, I
Okay.
knew
Who
that.
Tweeted that.
I wrote
You
that
just
one.
made that one up, right?
I was thinking if I was Hans, what would I tweet?
Okay, brilliant.
Tweet
Okay.
number 2.
Okay.
I will cover the health insurance for all 200 children. The payment processor didn't work. Please DM me and I'll send the payment via PayPal or bank transfer. Very happy to support this amazing project, and I would encourage all my followers to support this amazing initiative.
It seems too specific to be fake, so I'm going to say true.
Okay, correct. I just thought this was nice to throw in.
It's a nice gesture.
All right. Could someone explain what a venture capitalist is?
I'm going to say that's fake. I'm going to say that's
Alex,
fake.
are you
True.
judging?
Oh my God. Okay.
All right, you're 1 wrong.
Okay.
2
Wait, so what
wrong.
is Alex's score?
Well, I didn't guess the second one, but you're
I
our
should've
guest,
made-
so you're
it's-
the only one with the
I
prank.
should have
Okay.
made this
Sorry.
a competition. We
All
just
right.
put Danny in the hot seat.
Okay.
Embarrassing chess mafia proctor system just doesn't work. Couldn't play in Freestyle Friday today. Thankfully, I'll play a match against Anish on Endgame June 4th.
That's got to be real.
Yeah,
It's-
this one
Yeah,
was
this
too
one's
easy.
very
Going after
easily
Chess
real.
Mafia, it's got
I
to be
just
real.
found it's funny that it was proctor system doesn't work. Embarrassing. I just liked his language in that one. Okay. Who could take down the chess mafia? Question.
I think that's real.
I
Okay,
think
yeah,
it's
these are-
fake. Oh, shoot.
I think
Frick, I need to not spoil them. Okay.
I thought it was too obvious.
No, it's real. I think I remember that tweet.
Yeah.
Yeah, treat.
And
Trick or treat.
What do you think is the answer? Who could take down the chess
It's got to be
mafia?
him.
I can't believe GM Naroditsky didn't wish me happy Father's Day.
We gotta admit.
First of all, that's a
pretty funny.
great tweet. I'm going to assume it's real.
Alex?
If you came up with this, you are so funny. I hope it's real.
That wraps up my segment. Wait, I forgot this one.
Okay.
You guys have this is the last one. I guess someone didn't like my brutally honest tweets. Rare thing in the chess world. And then it's a
That's
screenshot that GM HIkaru has
Definitely
blocked
real.
you.
Definitely real.
Yeah.
That one is so good that it feels like it's a soap drama, but it's real.
It's real. You can't write this stuff. That's the thing.
Okay, last one. I mean this with sincerity. I would love the chance to give Levy a few training sessions for free. Small mental changes make a massive difference. My breakthrough from 2340 to 25 was purely psychological. Champions are created in the toughest times. Always remain optimistic.
That's real.
I
That's
remember
real.
seeing this one.
I should have tweaked these a little bit. All right, sorry. I said 10. I didn't count. Morphe didn't play the King's Gambit, so some streamers could pair it with a gambling code and a side boob. Chess is dead. Long live the Berlin.
Is he
No,
coming
I
for
did
me
that.
here? But I've never had gambling and side boobs.
That's got to be fake.
It has to be fake. I agree.
You sure about that?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, you got me.
Okay.
I had fun writing that one. Oh, sorry, guys. I'm having too much fun.
Andrea.
Real or fake? Never let him guess your next move.
I mean, it's
With
a
the-
photo of him. I don't think you photoshopped this. So it has to be real.
Okay, I could have been a little smart. I just thought these were so funny.
it's gotta
I
be
was
real.
going to change the title to say I have 3 watches and use this photo of him. I should have went with my original idea. Okay, I'm getting that's the end of the segment. Okay, I
Okay.
know how to improve it for next time. I need more
I
house
thought it was
troops.
pretty good. Speaking of chess drama,
Yeah.
recently we had some fun times. Emil Sutovsky, the CEO of FIDE, had a fun tweet where he was talking about how maybe some chess influencers bring less to the chess world than others. This was in response to Levy going on tour and that clip coming out where he said that the only 3 chess players people usually know are Magnus, HIkaru, and himself. And he was...
I was quite offended we weren't on that list.
Yeah,
Just
honestly,
kidding.
like, Levy, what the fuck, man?
I think it's
So
I
rude.
think it was a
No.
bit of an exaggeration because I don't think that's true. I think
Yeah,
that
it was
you-
taken out of
yeah.
context.
It was
but-
taken out of context, and he was talking about how, like, he's known because he covers Magnus and HIkaru. Obviously, people in India will know Gukesh and Prague and everyone else. He was more just talking about how it's hard for the average chess fan to follow these high-level events. And then Emil, I'm sure in a way, like, he is actually a grandmaster. He's been in the professional chess space for a while, so he probably sees these things as an attack and not respecting the professional chess players.
Yeah.
For me, I actually think it's really funny because there's always this tug of war between professional chess players and content creators, where when content creators are doing really well, I feel like there is a little jealousy in the chess world because people are like, I'm better at chess. I've dedicated my life to chess. They make videos and they get more rewards out of it. And then from the chess content creator side, it's like, we are putting in all this work to elevate chess, and people in chess don't really respect us because maybe we're not as high rated. And Levy had an interesting quote in his video where he said something along the lines of, chess is the only sport where the top players and the governing bodies actually don't respect the people who are bringing eyeballs to them as much as in other areas. I'm sure you've seen this entire discussion, and instead of a pointed question, I'm just curious your thoughts on the whole thing.
I'll end with the last point you made or that Levy made, because I agree with that point. I mean, look, I mean, I'm pretty sure Stephen A. Smith's contract with ESPN is public and well known. I mean, it's an 8-figure, very big contract. I mean, people know what Joe Buck makes from Fox Sports. He's literally the voice of the World Series, and what Mike Breen makes. I mean, Mike Tirico. I mean, the reality is that chess, I believe, is just very young in its growth story and its inflection point. And I'm not saying this to give the politically correct Mr. Big Chess CEO answer. I will say, I think with time, cooler heads and bigger picture perspective will prevail for all. And I think that in many ways, the traditional legacy of our world has been that in order to make a living in chess, the only way was to be like a top 10 or maybe top 30 player, right? So as content, the digital age, the internet, and everything that you do, that Levy does, that everyone has done to kind of, in my mind, revolutionize the game and make it more accessible, the early adopters and the early innovators of this are in some ways currently reaping more of the benefits than those they are covering, right? Or those that they are serving to some degree. So I'm saying this from 30,000 feet. The Botez sisters have done better than a lot of top chess players, right? Levy Rosman has done better than a lot of top chess players. I mean, the list could go on. And my point is that the early adopters of what was happening with this chess revolution that, again, started before COVID, before the Queen's Gambit, you were there. I mean, we were grinding and working hard and really investing, planting the seeds of what was going to grow, even if we didn't totally know how or when or what was going to be the catalyst. And I think that while this early generation is sort of leading the way, the reality is with more money coming into the game via more eyeballs and with more attention, it will only benefit everybody in the long run. Because the way I look at it, and I have this conversation, call it an argument or not, with a lot of top players, I go, look, in 2016, it was only chess.com we were offering like a couple $100,000 total and everything, right? To like basically giving birth to a competitor that we later had to acquire, that later drove all of us into putting millions of dollars, that now has us on the doorstep that I would argue of maybe a dream I've had for a long time, but I would argue maybe the most important step is yet to come, with the opportunity for chess to be a part of a broader esports ecosystem, not because chess needs to be an esport. Chess frankly transcends esports. I love our game. Our game is both IRL and online, right? It is unique, and I think it's one of the things that made the EWC so fascinated with the game of chess and its legacy, because of the audience we bring. But the truth is, we are on the doorstep of top players potentially being compensated and being valued in a way that they have never been valued before. And none of this happens without the thing that happened before it and the thing that happened before it. And so I think it's just short-sighted to be having arguments over who is doing more to currently serve or to grow, right? And I do think the words 2 and 4 are actually different. In this lane, it's just semantics in my head. But I think there are people who create content and maybe do more to serve the current community through the lens of how the chess community likes to be treated or entertained, right, in terms of the type of content they want. And then there are those who are doing maybe more for chess than any of those people to grow the game, to expose chess to larger audiences, to frankly break down barriers of stereotypes, of gender stereotypes, of age stereotypes, of all the different things that chess has struggled with for years, right? And like Levy, there's no argument against Levy having done amazing things for chess, right? Or the Botez sisters having done amazing things for chess.
You don't have to flatter
us. No, you don't have to include us.
I mean that. I mean, I absolutely mean that. Levy is exaggerating to prove a point, but whether he said those 3 people or 5 people, if I'm adding you 2 next, or if I'm going to 10 people.
I saw it and I wasn't offended.
But his point was, it should be 100 people that people know. It should be 200. I'm actually making that point not to compliment you necessarily, but to defend Levy's point in a way, to say that he was making a comment that was proving the point that despite how far the game has come, there are still only a few household names, whether it's 5 or 10 or whatever, right? And we want to be at a point where there are dozens, if not hundreds. And I think that in some ways, we should be thinking about how our game's presented in order to kind of continue to achieve that goal. But maybe that is Levy's goal. He's trying to do those things for chess. And maybe there are those who are serving the community, who are serving the community with different goals. And that's okay, right? I'm hesitant with the direct comparison because I don't like it when someone draws a direct comparison between two people, because there's no way for me to then compliment Levy without it sounding like I'm disparaging Cigar Shah, right? That's not what I'm doing.
I don't
right?
think I've ever met someone who doesn't like Cigar.
He's amazing, right? Cigar is just the sweetest, most amazing person
really
in the world.
is.
And it's almost like he's had a story that started with India. He was serving a very Indian-focused audience that has now become very global. His brand has expanded way beyond just what his initial audience was, right? Mm-hmm. And so I have two bigger picture things to say. I don't think that Emil's comments were in good taste, and I think it was...
Where do you think they came out of? Like, what is the sentiment that it's representing from Emil?
There is a bit of an old world versus new world sort of perspective that is a battle there. It's similar to maybe some of the sentiment that was expressed toward PogChamps early on, right? That it was the popcorn stuff, as Jan called it, Jan Nepomniachtchi, right? Versus the real chess, right? And I think that's why I started with the high level comment I made, because I was trying to say, like, in many ways, I think our industry is just very young. And I'm not trying to say that, like, you know, with time people will understand, but I do think there's a little bit of ignorance. And again, ignorance is used in these days as a term that sounds offensive. Ignorance literally just means like lack of education or information. We are ignorant in many ways to like broader business and media challenges in the world of chess, right? And like, because we haven't faced those challenges yet, right? It's not that abnormal in any other sport for major content creators or broadcasters or commentators to make a lot more than the majority of the people in the league. Then you have your superstars who make way more than that, right? That's not an abnormal thing. And I think Levy's right in that regard. And I think with time, people will see it differently. That said, for Emil to draw like a contrast or comparison to me is not in good taste. And I don't understand the motivation other than I think Emil definitely has a view that there's an American centric kind of Western bias of what's best for the game. Yeah. Versus like, you know, FIDE's more global kind of perspective on what the brand of chess needs to be. I mean, frankly, this came up literally in an argument he and I had recently over Jeansgate. I'll just share. I mean, he was like, you know, I completely disagree with him, so it's hard for me to like fully phrase his argument. But his point was that the American audience had a really hard time with how FIDE handled Magnus Carlsen's expulsion and or, you know, whatever it was. They would say he didn't even expel him because he was welcome back, whatever. That we had a very hard time with that because it literally looks like to the West, like, what the fuck are you guys doing? You're banning the guy who people wrote checks for the broadcast rights, the guy who brought fans to the arena in terms of not just VIP, but everywhere else, and the person that people want to tune in to see because of some literally spirit of the law violation. It wasn't even a direct violation of the rules. And I write rules like this for a living. The reason you write rules with little bits of generalities is because you hope that the person making the decision will make the right call, right? You give the person with authority the authority to see through the letter and the spirit of the law. That's why it was written the way it was, which was generally advise this, right? Because you hope that the person there would make the right call. And so for them to like defend that decision was just so ludicrous to me. But his view was it was sort of a Western bias because in other cultures, it is more proper. Everyone should be in a suit and tie, and there should be a more strict, whatever you want to call it, black tie dress code, right?
I mean, the Eastern Europeans and the Russians do know something when it comes to style.
But also,
if they saw what we go out to the grocery store with, they would be shocked.
Culturally, I agree. But that dress code, I was listening, I think, to Magnus's episode. It was a sports podcast on Barstool.
Yeah.
And I don't pay that much attention to males' fashion, so I might be getting this mixed up. But I think you were allowed to wear like chinos that are like shorts, but you can't wear jeans. Yeah. So it's not even logical if they're actually trying to be fashionable. It wasn't even based on logic. But anyway,
you don't like chinos?
No, like chinos are better than jeans. Come on, and they're shorts, like the little khaki shorts.
No, I'm with you. So my point is, I think Emil has a bit of a larger kind of agenda in terms of how he's framing what FIDE is there to sort of protect in his mind and sort of guide chess. In my way, I would almost call Emil out and say, like, is his hope that FIDE will somehow survive the content boom, that in the end, everyone here will be seen as like a fad and it was a temporary phase and that chess will go back to less viewers and, I don't know, less money and less attention in terms of how people consume content online. I'm like, if that's the goal, that doesn't seem like a very good goal, right? And I don't think you have to draw a comparison between those who might provide a certain type of content, a little more geared to people who've already bought into chess and are a little more serious, versus those who might be offering a slightly more highlight-driven, entertaining, in-your-face, sort of accessible way to talk about chess. I mean, it was not a good comparison to make. I don't think it was met very well. And I think it's short-sighted. That's what I would say. I think the bigger picture of how people are going to evaluate like this time will bear out.
And I will say, I do think it came from internal disdain towards creators at times.
Yeah.
Like I see people see Gotham's response, they get triggered because of how successful he has been. And to me, seeing that, it's an emotional reaction because there's no logical reason to put down people who are creating views for chess.
Sure.
So.
And by the way, this actually, to make a comparison of sports, if you ever hear like players in the NBA in the 80s or the early 90s make comments about the contracts they had before the Jordan boom, Jordan literally changed the face of the NBA, not just in terms of becoming the face of the NBA, but what happened like financially to the league. And it wasn't just Jordan. Obviously, there were a lot of other people at the time. And you know, having watched enough documentaries, David Stern, who I don't even like David Stern because he was a bad commissioner, but he did a lot as a businessman. The point is the league changed, and everybody, including just the bare minimum guys on 10-day contracts, are making way more money than anybody before them ever did. And there was a level of resentment, a level of disdain for those who came after them. And I think it's understandable. It's understandable. It's unfortunate because I think it's short-sighted, but it's understandable. And the reality is, I still believe that with time, people are going to look back at this entire generation and a lot of people who contributed as being the faces of having changed the direction of the world's oldest game. I really feel that. I feel pride in what all of us have done. And I really do believe that that is how people are going to look at this.
Speaking of FIDE and being professional, recently the viral clip went with Magnus playing against Gukesh. Magnus blunders, he rages, people run with it, make it seem like Magnus is getting dethroned when he just blundered and ended up winning the tournament anyway, which actually most people who play casual don't know that. They thought it was like Gukesh overtaking Magnus, and I've had to explain this to so many people. And when this happened, FIDE thought it would be a good idea to retweet Magnus's quote of, if you come for the king, you better not miss.
Yeah.
What are we, is this high school, Danny?
Well, first of all, I think that would have been a great tweet, but they took it back. I mean, chess.com eventually did lean into something like that because the social team at our channel they're a little bit younger and edgier and don't care so much about hurting Magnus's feelings. I mean, look, here's the thing. I think it was funny and would have been in good faith to kind of jest about it. I actually don't think it's the end of the world. But it's funny you say that because I think that anyone who knows about the tensions between Magnus and FIDE knows that those are very real tensions. And so there's a reason FIDE deleted it. You know, FIDE deleted the tweet, right? So FIDE tweets this, then they delete it. And, you know, this wasn't, I mean, again, nothing that comes from the chess.com account.
If you come for the king, at least don't delete your tweet.
Yeah, exactly. At least don't delete it. There you go. That's a great, we need to delete that. We need to tweet that. Our team ended up tweeting something similar to it or whatever, because I don't think it was in bad. It was fun and it was a good moment, and everyone was sort of celebrating this viral thing that was happening with Gukesh beating Magnus in the table slam, you know? So I guess I would call out FIDE to say, if you're going to tweet at the king, don't delete your tweet, right? At least stand by, because here's the thing. If you put anything on the internet, you can't take it back. What's the point in deleting it at this point? I mean, unless the only times I've ever deleted is when I actually regret what I said because I was then educated. I was ignorant on a topic, or I retweeted someone who then I found out, they actually don't represent my values or what I want to say. So I have deleted things, but it's because I would then go on record if someone asked me why, I would say, because I'm sorry, because I actually didn't mean that, and I actually regret that I said it. But unless you're going to be willing to be on record and be accountable for why you deleted something, you should never delete it, because otherwise it's online. And so I'm actually more surprised they deleted it. But I will say that, like, I think if you know that there are very real tensions between Magnus and really Arkady specifically, because of the way things went down around Jeansgate and the negotiations that have happened around freestyle. Again, I'm going to put this in the HIkaru Hans bucket, that I know too much about it to be respectful to both parties. I won't go into all of it, but I will say there's very real bad blood there, right? There is trust that has been broken, right? Magnus does not appreciate how he was treated in the process around Jeansgate, in addition to the larger discussions that he felt were not done in good faith around freestyle, and FIDE has their own perspective about it. They have their own view. So there is a very real issue going on in that regard. And I think because of that, probably what happened was someone at FIDE who does have a good sense of the social media pulse tweeted it. And then Arkady was like, delete the tweet. That's probably what actually happened. So I would say if you're going to tweet at the king and Magnus, don't delete the tweet.
All right, Danny. Well, I think we've covered enough chess gossip for today. The only last piece is that you're releasing a book, Dark Squares, about your life.
So this is Danny's book, Dark Squares. It's not out yet. We got our own special physical copy. We're trying to read it before, but it doesn't come out until September.
Yes.
But you can pre-order on Amazon. Here is the back. Born into the Church of Immortal Consciousness, Danny Rensch spent his childhood navigating the isolated confines of a cult. Despite psychological manipulation, physical abuse, and neglect, he persevered. An international chess master and world-class commentator, Rensch's remarkable journey led him to being the face of chess.com, one of the largest online gaming platforms in the world.
What made you decide to write this book?
I wrote the book in some ways because I was asked to write the book, and that sounds a weird thing to say, but I think I had never had an opportunity before to bridge or sort of merge the life that everyone knows me as, the chess person who helps run chess.com, and the fact that I had been raised in a cult and had gone through a pretty wild journey in order to even be a chess player. And it wasn't like I kept it secret. If it came up naturally in conversation, I would talk a little bit about it with people, but I had never really had an opportunity to do this. And so when I was asked to write the book, it was a moment where I was like, am I ready to do this? And I was like, yeah, I think I am. And so as far as why I wrote it because I had never had a chance before to be my full authentic self in terms of all the things that made me who I am, and that in some ways drove me to have the passion that I do to help the chess world and to do whatever my part is in terms of helping the game grow and doing what we did at chess.com. The funny thing is, a lot of what went into that sort of passion was the purpose I felt that came from the fact that the headline of the book is that I was actually taken away from my mother by the cult leader because he was obsessed with chess and believed that my divine purpose was to be a chess player. And so that's a pretty wild thing to say.
It's wild, but
not made up.
Was
either.
He wrong?
No, but I thought you were. But is it real?
So you grew up in a cult.
Takes.
Can you tell us specifically what cult you grew up in?
I grew up in the Church of Immortal Consciousness.
And what was the cult's motto?
The cult didn't have an agenda in the sense that when you think of cults, you think of Waco or you think of Jonestown or others that either had some sort of, aliens are coming, whatever the horrific agendas have been for cults. Was it a religious
cult?
It was a religious cult, but it wasn't there was no goal. There was no end game in that regard. It was I believe that a lot of people label them now, it was a high control, high demand group that was not necessarily an agenda, but it was through spiritual messaging, a very manipulative environment. And
how old were you when you started living in the cult?
I was born there.
So you were born there?
Yeah.
Okay, and
you're taken away from mom from birth?
No, not at the age of 12.
Okay, so you were born there, and then your parents were also there, and they had chosen to be a part of this.
Yes.
You grew up sort of in this environment, which did that mean it influenced your beliefs to also think that purpose was above anything since you were so young?
For sure. And and a big part of what I get into is my own sort of struggles with my own relationship with purpose as an idea. And I think probably the overarching thread of my book is sort of figuring out in some ways my relationship with purpose and where it goes and what that means and how you find it.
I just skimmed through the chapters mainly because I wanted to see how big the Hans chapter was, but I did see one called Existential Crisis.
Yeah.
And very much what you touched on, maybe some positive little tokens. Now, you've just finished this memoir. You're an adult. I'm sure you reflected on it a lot. What main tokens or lessons or little pieces of wisdom maybe do you have for the audience specifically on existential crisis?
Yeah.
And I imagine it's crazy when you live in a community like that and then you have to recreate all of your core beliefs.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is like, it's recreating, it's also reviewing, and then making sure that maybe in the process of looking at things, you you try to separate the good from the bad. You try not to throw out the baby with the bathwater, to use a rated R term that I was raised on. I don't know if that's an appropriate thing to say anymore, but the idea is that I think that as we all kind of grow into developing our own relationship with things like purpose, things like God, if we believe in that or not, things like what gives our life meaning or not, regardless of the reason we think about things, there are things we were taught and there are things that we go, that's not really for me. And there are things that you go, okay, like in that particular lane, I actually agree with that. Even if the teacher was wrong, the teaching itself was not bad, right? And I've done a lot of work in that regard because there were a lot of wild things about the journey that I was on as a kid, being raised in the Church of Immortal Consciousness, that I still have with me today. And at the same time, there's like no justification for what I went through. And you have to find the balance between forgiveness and not making excuses for your abusers. And that's a very complicated thing, especially for people to kind of hear me talk about and understand. But as far as what you said about existential crisis, I think that, or some of the things that I took out of it are that we are not defined by the things that happen to us. We are defined by the stories we tell ourselves about the things. And through my own, working with professionals, whether it's therapy or just my own sort of reviewing of life, I have found a lot of ways to sort of re-empower myself by re-choosing my life. And that, like, if I'm not unhappy with the ending, I'm not allowed to re-choose the opening or the middle either. And I think a lot of people look at their life in some ways, in ways that can continue to disempower them or keep them in a victim cycle when you think, oh, well, this shouldn't have happened, or this was unfair, or this isn't okay, or that person deserves justice. But ultimately, if you do the work to kind of reflect and be the best version of yourself now, you don't actually then get to also say this shouldn't have happened or this shouldn't have happened. I think the key to life is that everything does happen for a reason, but the twist ending is you get to choose the reason.
It's true.
And so that's kind of been my thing of what I'm hoping people will take out of it.
Because without the cult, would you have become the CEO of chess.com?
The chief chess officer.
Well, he was the CEO, but yes.
Probably no. That's the thing. And like, that's where I go, like, I also wouldn't have my amazing wife and 4 kids, even though a lot of what I share in there is the hard work of making a marriage work when you are with someone and having your first kid at 19, which I did. A lot of people don't know that. But like when you have your first kid super young and you barely make a marriage work while you're sort of surviving, because we were both in the cult, me and my wife. When you're kind of figuring those things out, like you look back and go like, OMG, like the fact that we figured it out means that, we, even though those memories were very traumatic and a lot of the things that happened were very difficult, because we're where we are now, leading chess.com or with an amazing wife and 4 kids, I can't undo the way we got there either.
You mentioned briefly that the man took you away from your mother because he said you are born to be a chess master. Do you think that without that experience, you would have had the same obsession for chess? Because obviously to become a CEO and a founder of a company of the scale of chess.com, you have to be
an international master.
Yeah.
Yes, you have to be completely obsessed with what you're doing. Do you think that level of obsession would have been different without that upbringing, or was that inherent in you?
For sure. No, it wouldn't have happened. No, I think that's one of the other parts of the relationship that I share, is that you have to come to terms with that too. And again, like coming to terms with that people may have done you wrong even while they were doing what they thought was right is like a kind of a mind fuck for people, right? And even more of a mind fuck, to use that word, is like someone might have even been intentionally doing wrong and it ended up being the best thing for you. There's two opposites of that coin, because everyone gets by, this person was trying their best, even though it wasn't right, they were trying their best. But then there's like, maybe someone actually wasn't doing the best thing, but it ended up being the best thing that could have happened to you. And that's an even weirder of maybe of a twist ending, but there's no denying that I would be where I am today without that experience. And in many ways, it actually makes me grateful even to that person, which is a weird thing, right? And so there's a lot in there, and I'm very excited. I'm so glad I got to give this to you both, because I can't wait to be back on this show when we finally get to have we will come back, and then we're going to talk about all of it even more. And by the way, and I'm not saying that for all your viewers. Hi viewers, breaking the fourth wall. I do think people are going to be surprised about it. It's been a very difficult thing to put on paper and then reread and then re-edit and then rewrite.
Was it an emotional experience?
It was super emotional. I mean, there were times to
reopen the wounds. I can only imagine.
There are things that I remembered that I would not have remembered without doing this. That is like even the hardest thing, is like in addition to reviewing things that I knew had happened, and they say that every time you remember something, you're only remembering the last time you remember it, which even if that's true, like I have obviously spent a lot of time coming to terms with my life even before the opportunity to write a book came about, right? So I've done a lot of work to kind of process and rewrite the stories for myself and sort of, work on my own emotional well-being, or you look at something that triggers you and you try to change that perspective. But then doing this book in the way that we did and having the opportunity to like get it on paper and then re-edit it ended up bringing up stuff that I had forgotten. And that by itself was a wild experience.
Do you remember at what age you first broke away and began to realize that not everything you know in the cult is true? Like, when was the first time you posed the question for yourself and went and find the answer?
I'll say this because maybe this is a good way to kind of wrap up and describe why the title is Dark Squares, How Chess Saved My Life, is because with perspective and with time and in hindsight, I think what I saw was that while I had been separated from my mom and was a tortured young, not doing very well, depressed teenager for many years, the fact that I was traveling in the world and developing relationships and then seeing things differently and getting experiences
because of chess tournaments,
because of chess, ultimately with time gave me the tools, gave me the perspective to challenge certain things and to look at things differently. And so I think in some ways the game of chess was both tormentor and mentor, because in some ways the game of chess like is the reason I, lost the relationship I did with my mom, and I will forever have the scars that go with that. But then the idea that you wake up one day and realize you're in a cult is just kind of a Hollywood version of it. The truth is or at least that wasn't my experience, right? The truth is coming to terms with what your life is and kind of the thoughts you have and the way that you kind of give away your own power and engage in a situation. It takes a lot of time to come to terms and be honest with yourself, like, oh, this is not okay. And I think there are very few cults. Again, this wasn't the cult I was in, where like, you wake up and your own family is kidnapping you in the night and taking you, right? My family was in the cult. My family was in the collective. My dad was one of the leaders of the collective.
Wow.
And you're going to read all about that. So this was a very complicated relationship with power and with my own self-worth and with God and purpose. So like,
well, that's why I wanted to specifically ask, do you remember the first belief that you internally were like, I want to question that? Like, for example, we interviewed a guest. She grew up, Ayla, in a very conservative family where her parents and her mother and father were very much like, you are just going to be a housewife. That's all you're going to do. And then the first time, her first act of rebellion, she had a very like vivid experience about it. So I was more just curious, like your first anecdote where you remember where you started to question one thing, not like a Hollywood breakthrough.
That's a really good question. I definitely write about some of them in the book, but when the way you're asking me makes me want to think of something different. What I would say is there were a lot of experiences as a teenager where I would go out into the world kind of on my own and people would ask me questions or do a certain thing. And then when I would come back home, I would kind of put certain things on notice of like, not necessarily confronting them, but sort of making note that this isn't necessarily right or this isn't okay. But probably the first experiences of like struggle and power kind of came up around my own relationship with Shauna, my wife. And there were a lot of dynamics where people were put together and then threatened that they could be taken apart. And so a lot of the, without getting into, one of the commitments I made in writing this book was that I wasn't going to tell people's stories that weren't my story. But when you read the book, you'll definitely get the experience that there was a lot more going on than maybe Danny Rensch decided to tell. So I will say that one of the most disturbing and unfortunate parts of the collective was that relationships were put together, but then consistently under the power threat that if you don't do what you're supposed to do, we could put you apart.
That makes sense.
Wow.
And when I fell in love with my wife, I was only 17 and she was 19. We didn't get together right away because there were dynamics that didn't allow us. You weren't allowed to date. There were all kinds of things. In fact, I wasn't even allowed to like my wife because I was betrothed to someone else like at the age of 13. I was supposed to be with a different girl. Her name was Corey. And that dynamic was its own like kind of just really struggle, because when you start to experience something that just doesn't feel good at all in here, but is what you're supposed to do, that was probably the first thing that was like the fear of loss that came up around the idea that I would not be able to be with someone who I loved because of someone else's decision was a game that we then had to play. we had to play the game in order to kind of survive that dynamic. But in hindsight, that was probably the most like visceral thing, along with many other things. Again, like objectively, with hindsight, maybe the first thing was like my relationship with my mom. Like, but again, there's a lot of that in there,
Love
you know.
is a very powerful
but
first
that was
anecdote.
that's probably the most, at least right now, probably the most vivid version of like my emotional body being able to remember that.
Wow. And is the church or collective or cult still around?
It is not. The trans medium, her name was Trina, she passed away. And so she no longer trances that spirit. Stephen Camp, who ran the collective, is still around, and there are a lot of members.
Are you afraid if any of them read your book or no?
I'm afraid of a lot of people's reactions of them reading the book, but afraid is a bad word because I've done a lot of work to not be afraid. I will say this, like, I don't expect anyone else's experience to be mine. There's going to be a lot of people from the collective who read the book and feel like I barely scratched the surface and there was a lot more to it. But again, it wasn't my job to tell stories that were not mine to tell. So from that perspective, I am not afraid. I am prepared for a lot of people to have a lot of big feelings. In regards to being afraid, like, I don't have any fear in regards to the contents of the book because I've kind of already done that work and in my relationship with my dad and through therapy and through different things, right? But I think I am a little bit like anxious over the idea that the world will get a pretty big spotlight on this. You know, I think there's going to be a lot of questions, a lot of conversations way outside of our world, outside of the chess world. And I'm trying to get better at talking about it. So this is really good practice.
And
so
what impact do you hope your book will have?
I think I shared a little bit of that earlier, that I hope that people will see that they don't have to give away their power. They don't have to give, whether their sense of purpose came from a 15th century spirit through a trans medium or through their own sort of like determination. Like, I think everyone has purpose and everyone can find purpose in what they do. And I hope that my version of how I kind of went through a lot of dark shit to kind of get there is helpful. And then I think that the idea, like I said, that people can learn, if they don't already have their own version of that, that you are not defined by bad things that happen to you, but by the story you tell yourself about it. And there's a lot to that, of course. Like, you know, it's a hard topic to talk about, especially if you were an abused kid, as I've said now a few times, because I've learned this, that when you're an abused kid, you don't stop loving your abuser, you stop loving yourself. I hope people feel like everyone, including themselves, is worthy of forgiveness, because one of the things I really made the commitment of when I wrote my book was that I wasn't just going to write about the bad things that happened to me. I was going to share honestly about the wounds that I developed and the fact that hurt people. And during my worst times, I was not the best husband or father. And I shared very honestly in this book about what that journey was like for me to find myself on the other side of that. And so I hope that that is also helpful for people to feel like they can face down whatever they want to face down.
Thank you for sharing that. For people listening, where can they find your book?
You can get it anywhere. You mentioned Amazon. You can go to chess.com/darksquares. We have a landing page. If you just Google Dark Squares. I'm not supposed to just promote Amazon. I love saying these things. I love some of the business side of publishing stuff.
On Amazon,
I'm supposed to say you can pre-order from anywhere, and you actually can. And it is good to promote, not promote, but support local bookstores. So if you go to chess.com/darksquares, you can order from any local publisher or whatever, but you can also get it from Amazon. And I did just recently finish the Audible, which was a lot of work. Yeah, that was hard, by the way.
To that. I love Audibles. I've been listening to Bobby Fischer's.
How long did it take you to record?
10 days.
How many hours a day?
6+
wow.
a day. And yeah, there were some days that were a little bit more. It was exhausting. Honestly, even as a chess commentator, we've done 8-hour broadcasts before. It's very different when you're reading the words on a page and then you can't slip into being monotone. You want to feel like it's real and that it, you know, you're putting the right inflection and energy into it. And there were times where the sound director, he was great, by the way. Shout out to my guy. He was very good at helping to keep me like, hey, Danny, sounds like you need to take a breath right now. Like, sounds like, because like you can lose yourself in the words, both in letting the words kind of overwhelm you emotionally, because it was very hard to read some of it. And some of that stuff kind of comes through, but you also don't want to fully start crying, right? So you have to kind of balance that. And then also you don't want to be too monotone when you're reading stuff where you suddenly slip into like, oh, I'm just reading it like it's not my life. I need to read it like I'm telling this story. So I had a really great sound director who came assigned from Hachette Audiobooks. they got a really great guy to work with me, and I appreciated his coaching, and it was fun. It was wild. It was 10 days of nonstop.
Well, we very much appreciate you being open and sharing this other side of you. I think it's something in general that the chess world needs more of, and I really enjoy these stories. We will also link in the description below all the pre-order links, not just the Amazon one for Danny's book. We're really looking forward to reading it. Hopefully we can have another discussion, but I'm happy that you're sharing this more personal side, and I don't think anyone will look at you differently for it. We definitely won't. I really enjoy when people share these extra layers, so we're looking forward to the read.
Yeah, thank you for coming, Danny. This was great.
Thank you for having me, both of you. This has been awesome.